New York Times wordplay reporter and language lover Sam Corbin recently reported on a Gen Alpha trend, a certain old-timey familiarity to the chosen vocabulary. She joins us this morning to discuss what she's observed and why it might be happening. Sam Corbin, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, no problem.
So, you wrote an article last week titled Why Kids Are Starting to Sound Like Their Grandparents. What do you mean by that? What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
Well, I think it's Gen Z as much as it is Gen Alpha. I never remember like what the age cutoff is, but I've been hearing yapping for at least, a year and a half. And it got to the point where for people watching the Super Bowl, you saw it in a Super Bowl ad where like it became kind of so mainstream that it no longer sounded like just a fringy slang term. And I spend a lot of time on TikTok, more than I'd like to admit on air. And if you look at the comments, people are always talking about, someone skedaddling out of there or sheesh or whatever these terms are that really do sound like, didn't I hear this on a, television show half a century ago before I was born?
Right.
So yeah, it's little things everywhere that gave me a sense that there was, a renaissance of some kind.
That you wanted to dig into. And when we talk about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, I mean, basically, you're talking about people that were born sort of after 2000 ish in that age group,
Yeah,
people who are younger than 25.
yeah, yeah, I'd say so.
And so you are looking into words. You mentioned skedaddle, yap, but you're also seeing other words that do seem to harken back to a different era like diabolical. Um, Tell us though about what you found about brain rot because I thought that was really fascinating.
Mm. Well, the Oxford English Dictionary selected that as its word of the year, I think, for 2024. And, one thing that the lexicographers really wanted to point out was that it had been used by Henry David Thoreau like centuries ago. And so it wasn't that new because there's always this sense that new slang kids these days are saying things or ruining language. But I think people who study language for a living always want to clarify that actually there's precedent for it, and sometimes it's way older than you think. And I think in the case of a word like rot, which has kind of become both a modifier like brain rot, you could bed rotting. You can also just say I'm rotting at home. It has a formality. Like if you listen to it in a different context, the rot of youth or something that sounds so highfalutin, and
Sort of
some
Shakespearean almost.
yeah, exactly. Some diabolical plot. But, you can also hear it in this young context, like, uh, doing this thing that's diabolical. Like it can have this high-low aspect to it. And I think that's what I was interested in and what I notice is that these words that seem really formal are now being pulled into the world of informal speech.
And so what were you able to find? You were talking to linguists. Is this sort of an expected resurgence? Is this a cyclical type thing that we can expect to happen on a regular basis at a certain period in time?
Well, I think what linguists I spoke to always point out is this is constantly happening. There's no real inflection point where the words from 1920 are coming back. But I spoke to Brienne Hughes, who's a historical linguist, and she was saying that, it's something cyclical when a milestone passes. We are subconsciously recognizing that all this time has gone by and maybe through some earworm, through something we're reading or watching, we just are subconsciously having this like nostalgic moment where we bring it back to the fore because it feels like the time to do it again. Yeah.
I loved one reference that you quoted in there. Somebody referenced it as sort of going back through the old photos of language, kind of flipping through and being like, "Oh, I remember that one. That one was pretty fun." You know.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the comments of that article, it has generated so many comments, and I think it's because everybody's got a word that they think, oh, that's got to come back. We need that potent language again. And one of the things that the article talks about is semantic bleaching, which is the way in which a word loses its power over time. And that's why we kind of reach into the more extreme places or the more fringe places in language to pull in these words that feel like they still have power. And so that's why you see people saying, oh, bring back lummox to insult someone, because calling them any of the vulgar terms I won't use on air, we hear it so often that it doesn't feel like it means anything anymore.
Yeah. And you have a personal request. You've got a word in mind that you'd like to force its way back into the lexicon. Tell us about whence.
I feel like I'm so spoiled that I get this huge radio platform to talk about whence.
Make your case.
It's I mean, I think that first of all, I think some people say, "Oh, from whence" is redundant, and that's true-ish. I think, um, whence can mean from where, and you'll hear people say from whence. Both are acceptable. Usage defines definitions, but I don't know. I feel like it's got this nice when I'm writing a column about crosswords and you're saying like whence the term emerged, to describe XYZ, like it just feels really playful. I actually spoke to an internet culture reporter, Julia Reinstein, about this. Just that if you could opt for a boring word or a playful word, like why wouldn't you just choose one that kind of lifts you up?
So, I mean, a phrase like semantic bleaching seems very creative. It really serves a purpose. But then we do end up with words that seem just so unsatisfying. Workplace. How did that ever become uh, like the go to default definition of what we all have to do every day? It is probably the most anodyne, it's just not satisfying. Workplace.
That's so interesting. I would have never noticed how boring that is until you said it.
That's my job on
I don't
radio, is to
know.
make it all sound really boring.
I don't know. I mean, I think that workplace is almost kind of a euphemism. Like, there are ways in which we almost make language more tolerable. There are I mean, there's euphemization, there's pejoration, where something that used to mean something good now means something bad. Amelioration is like, when you would say something sick, um, a while ago, I guess, that suddenly meant cool. So words kind of change context all the time. And I think probably workplace was driven by a capitalistic version of not wanting to say office anymore,
Yeah. It sounds like some of the language that's been created by HR. Um, if you're just
Ugh,
joining us,
yeah.
I'm talking to humorist and columnist Sam Corbin. She writes a column for the games section of the New York Times, as well as the weekly gameplay newsletter. If you have a question or comment for Sam, you can join our conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org. There you will find our email connection, our socials, so you can connect with us there as well. I did get a text from someone earlier when they heard us promoting this show, Sam, that had a specific question to the word kudos. He has an objection
Mm,
to it. He would like to see it gone, really dislikes it. There are certain words that fall into our daily usage that are a little foreign. Kudos is a weird one, but it is commonly used. What do you do as somebody that is in this field of word study and investigating the roots and the origins and also the usage? When a word comes across that is just sort of unpalatable, that you'd like to see gone?
gone. I mean, the most powerful thing you can do is not use it anymore. You can't really ask the world to stop using a word that's just in use, but words do fall out of usage because people get bored with them. But I will say that there's a very small university at the top of Michigan, like right before you get to Canada, called Lake Superior State University. And for decades, they've been doing something called the banished words list, where they say they used to take submissions from their readers and audience to say, here are the words we think should be banished from, kind of playfully, the Queen's English. And if you look, you will see that every few years someone says, can we get rid of the word awesome? Like it doesn't mean anything. But it's crazy. Like we are still using it and people are still complaining about it. So it's it's got to be hitting a nerve in some way. It's still something that we go towards to describe things that we don't really have the language for. And so the other piece of this, I'd say, is if you want to see kudos gone, come up with something that means the same thing but is a different word.
That reminds me of an editor of mine who had an on-ban list that was kind of perpetually growing, with words that we could no longer use in print. But
Hmm.
the opposite of that, trying to stop a word from being a part of the language that you use or the language that you're hearing is something that you talk about in your piece about this content creators, this very online cohort that is you describe as thirsty for coining terms. They're trying to create words. They're trying to insert them into the vernacular and make them popular almost as a branding effort. Can you talk a little bit
Hmm.
about that?
Yeah, I really feel like I hate to hesitate to use the word phrase youth today because that sounds so old and I'm really not that old. But I think that younger people today, because of the internet, because of this vast aggregate of informal language, have access to kind of the meta world of coinage. Like they are aware that new words are coming up in ways that I was not aware as a kid. I didn't have this kind of meta awareness that I might be bringing a word into my use, into my lexicon that was kind of new or hip or whatever. You just start using it. And so, yeah, I think that there was a period, and still is a period, of people on TikTok, coining like, have you heard of this new thing called quiet quitting? We're all talking about bookshelf wealth, which is how your income bracket based on the books you have on your shelf. And I don't know, I think there's this urge to kind of capture the world with a phrase that people have never heard before, and then mixed with the world of everyone having to be a brand for sure. Like people are literally trademarking. I think the person who coined hot girl walk has maybe trademarked it and like is selling merchandise for it. So it can, if you really care that much, then you could turn it into a business.
Language could also be transformational for people online. And you think of like the 6, 7 kid. But, in that vein, there also seems to be this desire to obfuscate and kind of confuse people who aren't in the know with language that is used by those who are chronically online and particularly young
Hmm.
people. Can you talk about that? I mean, the the desire to maybe have that special language that is unto a generation or perhaps a generation or two that is impenetrable by adults in many cases. Um, and kind of what
Yeah.
purpose that serves. Is that unique to this set of people we're talking about in terms of age, or is this something that every generation does?
It's definitely something that every generation does. Language is a way to construct identity, right? It's a way to identify with people your age, and there's kind of this in group and out group. And so, in order to have this sense of belonging, people need to use a code, right? That other people don't understand. And that code can be as subtle as a term or a way of speaking, like the William Labov article that I referenced talks about the linguistic avant-garde in Philadelphia adopting this quotative be like I would be like, oh my God, And so there's just little ways of speaking that make you feel like you have this world and identity. Um, and then the other part of it is like for all the hand wringing about, why is everyone saying 6, 7? Like people just like to annoy their parents. I'm sure everybody listening remembers a moment when they were saying something around the house and their parents said, what does that mean? You wouldn't get it, like it's such a fundamental part of being a young person is discovering who you are, and that's a really intimate experience. That's not something that you want your parents involved in.
We're talking to Sam Corbin. She's a games columnist for the New York Times. And if you have a call or question or just a general word nerd, you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. We have a call from Mark on the West Side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Good morning. Well, 23 skidoo, isn't this the bee's knees?
Oh,
I have I have a question more about usage, and we'll probably hear it in just a few minutes. But it used to be appropriate, very appropriate, to when somebody would say thank you, you would say you're welcome. But now I guess the term now it's just thank you and then thank you. I guess the term "you're welcome" seems somehow subservient, or I don't know what, but I've noticed it all over the place.
Mark, that's
Hmm.
interesting to note, and I'm going to add something to that, Sam, which is recently I was commenting to my husband that now when you walk into a store, everybody's saying, welcome in, which is not a thing that used to be happening 5 years ago. It's everywhere now. So, does the word welcome change how the meaning? Do we no longer say you're welcome, but we're adding it in a different way when we're welcoming people into a business?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I'm Canadian. So to me, having someone say thank you and then me saying no, thank you is like very natural. I've apologized to my furniture when I bump into it. I think I still do that. So there are, a mannerism there, but I think in general there are semantic shifts, right? Like without realizing it, maybe instead of saying you're welcome, we're starting to think about welcome as like just a an instinctive way to you know just like welcome people into your home, so as opposed to the maybe perceived smugness of starting to say you're welcome, like it's just again another way that we're using language to construct an identity. And um, when I talk about being Canadian and saying thank you to thank you, like it's part of how I've learned to interact with the world. So I'd be interested to talk to an anthropologist about what kind of social changes have galvanized that kind of shift. But it's just that we start using a word in a way and then someone else hears that, and without realizing it has this real ripple effect with usage.
I want to ask you a little bit about phonetic languages because you have also looked at how we often defer to common words when we're the sort of the A is for apple when we're
Mhm.
trying to spell something for somebody. Clearly, there is this NATO language that exists, which is sort of the Echo, Bravo, Zulu, and I mean, as a reporter, I've often had military people try to spell a word using those NATO phonetics, and like literally just please just use the letters. I can't, but there's, this is something that exists for a reason, and often we don't use it. Why is that?
Well, use it is a really great way to talk about it. We use the word apple, or we're primed to think of A as for apple because that's one of the first words we learn. And so you don't really think about the word alpha. It has such a specialized use case. But again, we have this world of informal language. So we're so used to spelling things over the phone that we're reaching for words that are really close at hand. We don't want to go out of our way to learn the NATO alphabet. And it has its use. I mean, it was invented so that people speaking to each other over the radio wouldn't get confused. It like had a real military usage. But for the most of us who aren't in the military and who are just trying to connect with someone over the phone in customer service, we're not reaching for that formal language. We're thinking A is for apple. And I can't tell you how many times I say like L is for, and I start panicking, and I'll say like, do they know Larry as a name, or lasso, or like the weirdest things are coming out. um I mean, I spoke to a friend of mine, Jersey Gwizdowski, for that piece, and he talked about the desire path of language. He's got a Polish last name that he's always having to spell over the phone, and he said there is no ignoring the desire path of zebra. Like it is just such a fundamental Z word
Yeah.
that if you're looking for Z as in, you're going to say zebra.
Yeah. And back to the issue of language that might be designed to confuse, you actually link in that story to this really hilarious alternative phonetic language that's actually sort of designed to confuse, where every letter is so K is for potassium, and X is for Twitter, and P is for urine, which is sort of a hilarious twist there. So there are ways that language is trying to, um, you know, clarify, but also somewhat to confuse and to not necessarily make us any clearer. I think we did just drop out, so we lost Sam there. I'm going to have to come back to that question with her on the other side. We're going to take just a short break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Hey, Sam, I think we've got you back. Are you there?
Yes.
Sam, thank you. So I think we lost the video component, but we've still got you on the phone. So that's great. And I dropped out there where I was asking you about this alternate phonetic language that you link to in your story, in your story about the NATO language, where, as I was saying, like K is for potassium, X is for Twitter. It is not necessarily designed to clarify. And in fact, it is designed to confuse. I guess that's just for amusement. But does that sort of speak to this, again, this sort of desire to use language in ways that is perhaps not entirely helpful?
When you say it's not entirely helpful, do you just mean that it's just for fun, or?
I mean, I guess it's just for fun, but I think it maybe crosses over with the idea that some level of confusion can be enjoyable if you're adding that into the mix, that can be something that people will take pleasure from as an inside joke or as a generational divide.
Absolutely. I mean, I wrote a piece about constructed languages, conlang for short, and how uh, that nonsense babble is a way that fandoms find community. So Simlish is a good example. It has no real consistency to it. You couldn't map the English language onto it, but people can, watch videos of someone translating a Katy Perry song into Simlish, and it gives them this sense of understanding. And like Animalese, which is a phonetically, it's like the h-I sped up very, very quickly so that it sounds like this babble. If you spoke to each other in Animalese, there's a 0% chance you understand literally what the other person is saying, but it's how two people who love Animal Crossing connect.
I want to just play a little bit of sound. This is from the author, Ocean Vuong. He was talking in an interview recently with Krista Tippett from the show On Being, and he was talking about language and its evolution, sort of in the way you were. I just want to take a listen.
That notion that you are a participant in the future of language is something I think our American education failed us. Language is always changing, and I think it's the poets, the writers, and even the youth. They're using language to cast new meaning in the same way Chaucer just winged English spelling. There was no standardized spelling.
Right.
So he was like, spring, S-P-R-Y-U-G? Sure. Let's try it out.
So I thought that was pretty cute, talking about Chaucer just winging the language there. But there is an element to just this experimental level, Sam, when you're, writing about language. That's something that you definitely have dug into.
Yeah, I mean, it really touched my heart to hear that. Like, we are the future of language. It's so true. Like, without trying, all we have to do is trust in language to kind of carry us in terms of our creative expression, our communication. That's why I write so much about wordplay, because it's a way of kind of enjoying language that it's not that we lose, but it's that we forget to. If we're only using language as a vehicle for direct, efficient communication, we lose this entire kind of dimension of it that I think really drives that language change in fun and exciting ways. Like, if you look at all the new words of the year, things like that, they come from playing on words. So broligarchy is a good one. I think it was a nominee for Word of the Year in maybe 2023 or something. It's a portmanteau, of bro and oligarchy. Like, you kind of need to love how language sounds to discover that word or to coin it.
So I mentioned at the top of this that, you write for the game section, you write the New York Times newsletter, the Game wordplay newsletter. And so you spend a lot of your time in people's heads talking about really great stuff. And, I think you have a job that a lot of us think sounds like one of the most fun jobs on earth. I'm wondering if you can share some story or some insight that will disabuse us of that notion. Perhaps we won't be quite as envious. Tell us something about your daily grind that isn't just as much fun as it sounds like.
Well, I mean, I won't lie. I have a lot of fun, but I write about crosswords for a living, and sometimes those crosswords are really hard to solve. And sometimes I find myself rolling my eyes at a theme because I think, oh, I sweat through my shirt for that. Like it was just, a bunch of words about water. So I think that it can be challenging, and I'll ask crossword editors who I work with, like, am I missing something here, or is this the joke, or why does this clue solve to this? So there's a lot of muscling, I think, that happens, or wrestling with language that is sometimes fun and sometimes not so fun. But like you said, I spend a lot of time in people's heads, and I think that the exercise of trying to understand where constructors came from with this wordplay and then reading their notes that they share with the wordplay column, it's like, it's so cool to get inside someone else's head. 9 times out of 10, I'm wondering, how did this person, like, what is working in their brain that they thought this pun and in the crossword in this way?
Yeah, I mean, it is really fun when you demystify how the clues are arrived at. I mean, a lot of times people may get the answer in the crossword and not entirely even understand why that's the right answer. So it's a great resource for that and makes it a lot more fun to understand. I've got to ask you
Yeah.
about a very deep track here. Fans of the Lonely Island and Seth Meyers podcast will know where this is going, but there has been this ongoing speculation slash conspiracy theory that the New York Times is secretly communicating with the members of the podcast, The Lonely Island, through the crossword, through the spelling bee, with words that have to do with the SNL shorts, the video shorts, things like doppelganger or lettuce or Andy Samberg. So, like, what is that true?
I will say, for like the safety of all involved at the New York Times crossword, no, there is no conspiracy. I do feel the need to clarify that, but far be it from me to disabuse you of the notion that there is something shady going on, because sometimes I wonder why I solve a word and then 2 days later it's in the crossword, and
Mm.
then 2 days later, and I think there's something going on here. And I'd rather credit it to, the cosmos than to a puzzle editor trying to mess with us, because I do talk to them every day and that is not what they're doing. But I understand why, that starts to grate, and make you think that there's something nefarious going on.
I want to just mention too. I mean, we would be remiss not to note, are a super champion pun master. You have multiple titles in multiple competitions from places around the country, and I have to ask this to sort of settle something with my producer, who is also a big pun fan, um, about the fact that a pun has to work both ways to be a pun. It has to work in its original context, and it has to work
Mhm.
on a sort of surprise level as a different
Mhm.
interpretation. Can you just
Yeah.
back me up on this, please, Sam?
Well, I hope you're on the side of it has to work both ways, because, you can go to a any restaurant heading like Taiwan on, as a Thai restaurant. And like that's kind of got like a food humor aspect to it. If you're going in to drink and then you've got Thai food, that's fine. But, if you just are uh, sending a card with a picture of a little sushi and it says rice to meet you, like there's not really a point to that. And when you look at Shakespearean wordplay, the reason that it's so kind of touching and heartrending is that the two layers of meaning are like they have stakes. So look for me tomorrow and you will find me a grave man. Like this idea of I'll be somber, I might be dead. Like
Mm.
it's got some weight to it that makes you think, and it expands rather than shrinking into itself.
I wonder too, as a champion punster that you are, if you sometimes feel like that is almost an affliction, that once your brain is kind of going into that territory, that you can't really recover, that you're constantly generating puns, whether or not you share them or not. Is that
Yeah.
is that the case?
Not for me. Like I know that there's the story of witzel sucked, people who can't stop punning in their brain, and it's like a real affliction. When I talk about being afflicted, I think it's more just having a reputation as a competitive punter is like a choice background to have, as opposed to, oh, I'm a Pulitzer Prize winning poet. I'm a competitive punter, has a very different ring to it. Um, so yeah.
I just want to ask you a little bit about what you're working on because, the word of the year is this obsession in some circles. It has become a national focus every year when it's time to produce that list of finalists. And you're working, I believe, on a book on that topic. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What it is that you're working on and why that has
Yeah.
become such a, kind of such a touchstone for people these days?
Yeah. Yeah, the book is in theory called Year of the Word. Might change before publication, but it's looking at kind of a year in the world of language coinage and tracking the words as they trend upward toward Word of the Year. Like if you look at this year's candidates for the American Dialect Society's Word of the Year, and I do kind of place a focus on the American Dialect Society because they are considered the bleeding edge of language change. That's where all the young people come and nominate 6-7 to be the word, as opposed to this smaller desk of lexicographers deciding what's been, the most popular or the most relevant. I think there's merit to all the versions. But I'm trying to kind of chase the world of like how a word goes from, one person on TikTok, like demure, to all the way up to this national recognition. And at the same time, inviting people to see themselves kind of like what that Krista Tippett article or interview talked about as the future of language. We are the dictionary. The dictionary is kind of, it's a record. It's a living record of how we speak. And so my hope in this book is just to encourage people to, again, be whimsical, enjoy language, enjoy its potential, and not be afraid of inventing.
Well, Sam, that's something that you help us do every single week. And we so appreciate you joining us this morning to talk about it. Sam Corbin is a columnist for the games section of the New York Times. We will have a link on our website to her most recent story about why your kids' language is starting to sound very familiar in an old fashioned way. Sam Corbin, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.